we're now at the time to start. We have 46 people. Welcome, everybody. Who of us is going to do the introduction?
Well, I
go for it, Dave. It's
I don't mind.
Slice.
So the background to this is that when the sessions were getting organised, John Shuck thought that one of the critical subject areas that was topical and critical is this whole issue of just in time. And there were, we've just been discussing the pandemic, and throughout the pandemic there've been a whole series of supply shortages and so on and so forth. And so what he did was he said, I'll get 3 people that maybe have got an interest in this to do a session. And so here we are with a set of questions.
That's a very interesting discussion, because is there lean without just in time? I mean, Dan was talking about the early research in the early 80s, and at the time it wasn't called lean; it was called just in time.
Yeah.
And the irony is, I remember when we were fighting back a while back to say, hey, there's not only just in time, there's also respect for people and problem solving. And it seems that we won this battle, and now just in time is, it's like you put one more book on the shelf, and the book at the bottom of the shelf just gets dropped. So now it's all about coaching and problem solving, and where's just in time gone? So it's really funny.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's maybe. We're going to talk about it, aren't we, for half an hour? But one of the things is that you need all of these things in this systemic view, but maybe people can't really think in a systemic way. So the community goes from one thing to another thing, and some things become more fashionable.
I'd love to have your point of view on this. I think that just in time is it. It's the biggie. It's the hard one, and it's where the difference is. And that a lot of the stuff around it is, how do you deal with the problems just in time reveals? But my feeling doing lean for real is that what transforms, what delivers, is just in time, and being able to cope with it and not doing anything silly like reducing stock absurdly or doing or unthinking. You don't want to do non-thinking just in time, because you just kill yourself. But my thinking is that just in time is the trunk of the tree. It's where the benefits are, and everything else is dealing with the problem just on surfaces. Christoph, I'd love to hear your point of view on that.
Just in time is important, but for me, it's more of some of the advanced things in lean manufacturing. And if you start with just in time, I think you may quickly run into trouble, because for me, lean starts out with first just basic stability. And then you have something like standards. Then you go to pull, leveling, and at one point you go into just in time to actually try to, get the stuff just in time. But it also depends a little bit how you define just in time.
It's fascinating. It's a debate I've been having with Dan since, 20 years, I think, because the people I know, like Art Byrne, my father, they always started with, and Toyota in my father's factory, they started with brutal just in time. They Kanban. They started with Kanban. They just started with Kanban, and then they stabilized as they dealt with the problems it created. And I've always found it much faster than trying to stabilize operations first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I personally think it depends on the problem to solve. So, and I think actually, if you take that earlier session, I don't know whether you watched the Jim Morgan, Jim Womack session right at the beginning, where I think it depends where you are in your supply chain as to some of these issues. If you're a first tier automotive supplier, then your customer that you're delivering to, it's known. If you're delivering to Ford, then you're in for a rocky ride of difficult scheduling and etc. If you're delivering to Toyota, then you've got some semblance of some kind of leveled forward plan most of the time. And so actually, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised that Toyota would do that type of thing and want to create the conditions of having pull. And but actually, as prep for this, I went and took a look at what it actually said on the Toyota website about just in time. And do you know what it says?
Go on.
Yeah. Well, it says just in time is all about making exactly what the customer needs, when they need it, in the quantities needed.
And good quality and the right location.
Yeah.
That's a surprise. They've been saying this for the past 40 years.
Of course. Yes, of course. But look, you've got three old guys that are chatting. But it might be okay for Jim to say, well, younger people can think about these problems, but we're pretty old guys as well now. And I went and had a look at that and thought, well, of course, that's the just-in-time pillar of the Toyota production system. And actually, I think that would be interesting would be we had three questions that we thought we would talk about. The first question was, the pandemic's highlighted how supply chains are organized across the globe. So how has COVID, and this was Christoph's point, was, well, how has COVID impact on those global supply chains? And of course, the media, who is not the lean community, it's the media, the Wall Street Journal or whoever, they've suggested that just in time is responsible for customer shortages. Right. And of course, that's the lean community is in uproar at this, or some of the lean community will be in uproar at this. Some of the lean community will be saying, oh, is that true? Or maybe we ought to just switch to an agile approach then, So,
that's gonna help.
Yeah, of course. Well, we all know that's gonna help. So I suppose that would be a good, that's a good thing to discuss for a few minutes. Because if it is really about making exactly what's needed in the quantities needed, when needed, then actually the logic of location is an interesting piece here, because what's actually happening.
Yeah, I think that I think it has not. I think it's not a just-in-time, not just-in-time question. I think that what we're not seeing here is that supply chains are now run by ERPs. And even more than when we started, are even more fragmented and all over the world. It hasn't stopped. So as far as I understand, a lot of the shortages are due to. I remember I had a session with the ops directors of a very big shipping company, and I didn't believe them at the time, but they were all bitching about the conditions of the ports. And they were saying there's absolutely zero investment in in cranes and things like that. And what I understand now is a lot of the shortages is not that we don't have the parts. The parts are stuck in containers in ports with queues of trucks trying to get in and out. So again, it's like there's an invisible reality here. I don't think it's a model of whether you're in just in time or not. I think that Skynet is already running supply chains. And if we had a map to actually map the supply chain, it was exactly like the ship we see here, that the reality is that the digital tools are completely out of control.
I think we would need to split here into two things. First is the normal consumption of everyday products, and then there's a peak demand of products which we haven't used before in that quantities, like mask or so. And just in time is, for me, a way of trying to manage fluctuation. And for some demand, like the mask, you couldn't really foresee this. You can't plan for everything, otherwise your inventory just goes through the roof. So it's pretty much impossible to kind of plan for such a black swan event. And so in this case, just in time didn't fail. For the normal products, as you said, it's a problem in the ports that it wasn't unloaded. So there's backlog in the ports, which means on the other side of the world, there's a lack of containers to ship things out. And that is not overly well managed, but I would not blame just in time for this. Maybe more a lack of just in time. And to me, it feels a little bit like a bullwhip effect, where some small effect gets accelerated and becomes bigger and bigger. And now gets everything to a crunching halt. That's kind of my gut feeling on the situation in the ports, that we're pretty much unable to get this. We have the stuff, just not in the right place. As we said before, kind of right place, right time. It's not the right place.
Yeah. I think both of those sets of points are very valid. I mean, if you think about the supermarket cases, when COVID hit, you had all these people just bulk buying toilet roll.
Yeah.
And of course, the underlying demand for toilet roll is still going to be so many rolls per house per month. But actually, you had all of these people saying, well, we might never be able to go shopping or whatever. And so you had this exact bullwhip effect, the demand amplification hitting the supply chain. No well-run supply chain is actually going to be able to cope with such an amplification effect.
We're definitely in a perfect storm. I mean, all the factors are converging. And the interesting thing is that it comes out on random parts. I mean, of course, there's a chip shortage, but that's not a surprise. We knew it was coming, and Toyota knew it was coming and did something about it. But I think there's something deeper here that is very back to lean, which is when you visit plants in the Toyota supply chain, back to just in time, logistics comes first. They fix the logistics first. They invest in logistics. You know these offices that you see in all the plants where you have 4 or 5 guys and you ask them what to do there? Are they engineering? No. Are they? Well, they're just there to make sure that the 20 trucks a day are exact. So I think there's an investment in understanding that you fix logistics first, which reveals every other problem, which is back to the argument about Kanban. Whereas the fight is with the people who say, hey, let's do demand, let's do whatever, and let's logistics come after. And I think this is where the big debate is. And let's put in the computer systems, we don't have to run them. And so logistics will fill the demand. And I think there's a very big debate here between the place you give to logistics in any operations.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And it will depend on the circumstances, won't it? Surely, running a car plant with 30,000 separate items is a big logistical challenge. Having a company that makes a mask might not be quite as big a logistical challenge, but more of an issue of where you make it.
I was today in the hospital that is starting a lean transformation, and we were all discussing what we want to do and who wants to do what and so forth. And at the end of the day, it comes down to, well, how many people do you want trained? And out of these people, how many people are going to get it? And how do you support them? And we're back to logistics. It's all about loading and capacity. And I think the beauty of just in time is that it reveals your load capacity imbalances all the time.
Yeah, I think logistics, it will be even more important in the future, because my observation is that the products become more complex, the value chains become longer and more global, and the life cycle becomes shorter. So it's will be a much higher demand on logistics in the future, excluding, of course, this current event with the COVID, where this pretty much messed up the entire supply chain, partially because of COVID, partially because people did not pay enough attention.
Yeah. But I think that one of the other issues really is that if you talk to most companies, if you go, me and Dan have mapped more supply chains than we can shake a stick at, and actually, if you go beyond tier 1, nobody knows.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So we were doing that research 30 years ago to the steel to automotive supply chain. And the reality is that if you go to the actual press worker and say, right, what does your supply chain look like? No idea. And I think actually a lot of OEMs don't know.
It's interesting, Dave, because supply chain is completely a misnomer. It's really a supply network. It's a network, and I think that the beauty of just in time is that it brings capillarity into the network. I mean, picking up from your factory 20 trucks a day with every part in it, as opposed to having full trucks of one part randomly through the system. I mean, one is it's like trying to pump things, brutally, as opposed to look at it as a network, a value network, and through capillarity, regularly drawing all the value from it. I think it's a very, very different model.
Yeah. Yeah. But one it's got expanded into sectors outside of automotive over the last 30 years. I mean, when we were doing the supermarket stuff in the 90s, that's exactly what they did. It was one truck of Coca-Cola. Now they deliver mixed loads in time sequence,
and then they revert,
loaded.
and then they come back. It's interesting because they go that way, but it's hard so that they come back because they don't put in the resource to solve the problems this requires. There's a second I think misunderstanding is that supply chain people tend to think of the supply chain as something that you can fix. You tend to map your supply chain or program it and look at, like Christoph does very well, look at the demand pattern and somehow fix it. My experience with these things is a bit different, is that every lean tool, and Kanban included, is something that should show everybody what they can improve personally. So it's not fix it and then tell somebody you do this, but it's show, and so that everybody think, oh, I want to work on this, I want to work on that. So I think there's a second misunderstanding there about just in time.
I think
the first one is that it's just there to
production, that it breaks this long and complex supply network down into different small loops, and you need to control your loops. And if most people do it gets much smoother. So
it's an analysis,
manageable problems.
It's an analysis method. It breaks down the factors by the very virtue of doing it. And this is fantastic, which is exactly what you're saying, because I worked in very large factories, and it goes all through the ERP. And all you have is lines of data and cells, and it doesn't fit your head. And when you ask people to do an analysis, all they can do is a Pareto, but that doesn't really help you because the next day the Pareto is going to be different.
Yeah.
So once you actually put in the pull system, exactly, Christoph, it does the analysis for you because it breaks it up into places that you can immediately see where the pain is.
Yeah. And it's pointing at the fractal nature of lean, isn't it? Really, that you're wanting to try to get the decision making to the closest point to where the work is being done, and basically, I think somebody put on here, ERP is not the problem; it's a tool. It works as it was taught by its masters. But actually, I don't buy that at all.
How do you actually teach an ERP anything? That's the point.
Yeah. And the algorithms, some of the algorithms that are embedded in there are not really even known by anybody.
There's an interesting question here is like, what is the effect of organizational capabilities on lean and organizational performance? It's probably the other way around. A capability is a competence multiplied by a resource. So you have different situations. Sometimes you have the competence, but you don't have the resource. Sometimes you do have the resource, you don't have the competence. Sometimes you have neither. And here, this is where what lean does is build. It enables you to do both. So basically, when you start having, and I was thinking about it, Aramis, I'm going to talk about them tomorrow. So maybe these guys just introduced their company in the stock market, so it was very big success with lean. But when you start putting more intelligence in the just-in-time, it starts showing you where you lack the resources. And I think that's the beauty of the just-in-time system. It's like having a compass, because it's objective. It's going to tell you where you need more resources. So if you are able to put more competence there, then it unlocks it and moves you to the next step where it tells you more resources. So what really just-in-time is, when you have a system like this, is that you have it's weak point management. You can constantly monitor where you're overusing resources or where you need competence.
Interesting. Yeah.
Shall I move to the next question?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
There's clearly an argument that outside and probably inside the world of lean thinking, just in time has been misunderstood. What do you think the key misunderstandings are, and what can and should be done about them?
I think we probably just answered that.
Yeah. We have
what
been
can be
answering a fair amount.
and to the second part, what should be done about them? Oh, I wish I knew.
Yeah, well, just in time doesn't guarantee availability, but it tries to manage fluctuations basically. And if the fluctuations are a bit bigger than what you can handle, then sometimes it goes through.
I think the one problem I don't know what to do about it. One problem we have with the lean movement is that we three were taught at the time where you started with just in time, and then you learn the other stuff. But no, I'm not sure this is the case now. I think a lot of people come from Agile and things like that, and they go to the Kaizen stuff, and then they think just in time. I'll get that when I grow up. It's the kind of argument what you said. We're saying we do pull when we grow up. Well, the thing is, my experience is that we're never grown up enough to do pull. You're never stable enough to do pull. Just pull and see what breaks and fix it. So I think that one thing we could do is bring back the importance of just in time as a really big part of lean. Do you remember, Dave, that very first article Toyota did in 1977?
Yeah, the Fujio Cho.
Where they had two systems. They had just in time and respect for people.
Yeah.
And they would put Jidoka in the just in time pillar for them at the time, because of course, if you're in a just in time system, when something happens, you need to react very quickly.
Yeah.
And at the time it was very clear.
Yeah, but I do think that what happens to people is they flip and flop between those two things, and actually, if you take John's framework with the underlying thinking, the management system, and the purpose bit, the problem to solve, people are flipping between those as well. So you've got a lot of people, lots of people ring us up and ask us about culture. They want to create a culture. And you kind of say, well, okay, so what do you think that means? And they say, well, we need to train people on culture and behavioral assessments and all of this type of stuff. It's a very, very traditional thing to think, isn't it? Whereas what you could do is you could do something and then see what happened.
And see what happens.
And that would be a completely different way.
There's a question here reminds me of a funny story. There's this Frenchman and this American and this Japanese guy who are building a plant in the mountains and somewhere, and they get caught by the guerrilla, and the guerrilla are Marxists, and they're going to tell you, we're going to shoot you because you represent international capitalism, all these things. But because we believe in free speech, you can all say something. So the Frenchman comes first and says, "Vive la France!" Then gets shot. Then the Japanese comes here and says, "I'd like to talk about the lake and the rocks." At which point the American jumps out and says, "If I have to hear one more time about the lake and the rocks, please shoot me first." So I think the question is, in a VUCA time, just in time is very difficult to maintain. What is more important, to always satisfy customers or keep inventory low as possible? It's not about the inventory. It's not about the inventory. I mean, I've always seen Toyota put back inventory before doing anything. It was people were surprised. It's about having the inventory to deliver whilst revealing problems. So it's always about lowering the water in the lake. And that story is so profound, because the other part of it is not something you do to people. You have to be able to show them, look, here's the water of the lake. What do you think the rocks are? How do you think you should improve? So it's about having this conversation. So there's no right level of inventory. And what we saw with the chip shortage is that when Toyota saw it coming, they put in all the inventories they could. Of course they did.
Yeah. And haven't been anywhere. They have been affected by it, but they haven't been anywhere near as affected as some of the others by their response. I think the other thing is that you can flip too quickly from the in-time element of just in time to this issue about inventory. And there's a whole load of spreadsheet monsters, and they quite like working out the ideal level of inventory when everything is working properly. But the reality is that this particular machine might break down. Yeah. And then what's your response to doing that?
Yeah.
And I mean, we've got an MSC that's run in the UK, and I've long thought that the demand and capacity module of that MSC is just overtly too Excel driven. It's not. There's no experimentation.
Do you remember, Dave, the time when they used to teach us that the ideal level of inventory is half of what you have?
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, that's
you just need barely enough inventory to keep the customer happy, and then in the next step you should try to reduce fluctuations so you can get away with even less. That's my kind of approach.
But to be honest, there's a whole technicity of it. When you have the slides about what they have, the thing is, how do you cut your inventory into very specific inventories, which is what we do. Mm-hmm. You have the inventory should. In fact, I think the most profound thing you said, Christoph, is very profound. This idea that the inventory should also represent certain types of variation. So you have different inventories that actually correspond to something. So your inventory is not a dead thing; it's something you work with. It's a tool. And you go into the warehouse and you start separating physically inventory for what?
Yeah, the cycle
so that
stock,
you can understand
safety stock.
Yeah, safety stock, and then variation stock, and then machine breakdown stock, and back to the shop stock as opposed to the inventory. All these things, which is about doing what Christoph is saying, which is have a physical analysis, break down the problem into physical locations. So that when you see something is happening, it's there. And I think that's a very, very important part of just in time.
Yeah. And then you can look at the biggest chunk and see how you can make it smaller.
Yep. And that's also, it's a bit ironic then that we've globalized these supply chains. We've actually offshored loads of stuff. And quite often what that's actually done is massively lengthen the lead time and that's increased stock far more than the potential benefit that has been derived from a lot of that type of activity, and made the actual network far more complicated to manage. But we think that
remember in the early days what you were saying about spreadsheets, when the people were calculating the size of a shop stock, and you had mountains of stuff, and the sensei would come in and says, just get rid of all this and see what happens. And there was absolutely shock horror. But I don't know if we could even do this anymore because it's all hidden in the system now.
Yeah, well, yeah. Again, depends on the place, doesn't it? So Ben's asked a good question. This is a good question. Mm-hmm. There's a great book, Ben. Before we let Michael and speak, there's a great book by a guy called Carlisle, who's actually, I think, was a South African, and I think Ben's in South Africa at the moment. Carlisle and Parker, with early 1990s, and that has got a great piece on the prisoner's dilemma, and it's all about strategic partnerships. So I think it might have even been called partnership sourcing or something like that. So anyway, Ben's question, at a systemic level, how would you propose to address the prisoner's dilemma that the current model of JIT has given rise to, i.e. enterprises competing primarily for their own, sometimes spreadsheet-driven self-interests? It's a good question.
This is way above my pay grade, Ben, particularly at this time of the night.
Yeah.
I think we need to meditate on this, and I think we're running out of time, aren't we?
Yeah, I think when I checked it correctly, we had up to 107 people in the room at the most, which is a very nice and sizable number. So that worked very well. And hopefully we'll see each other again in the next few sessions. I think all of you have more presentations. I have 1.5 hours where I talk exclusively about pull production. But yeah, it was a great session. Thank you, everybody.
It was lovely to see you both, and to everybody still listening. just in time is the narrow door through which you have to step to understand lean. It's a narrow door. It doesn't fit for everybody. It's a narrow door, but please do not try to get around it, because the lean room is fantastic, but you have to get through the door. You have to get this just in time thing. Christoph, it's lovely to see you. Dave, it's been a while. We should have a virtual beer, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And a game of pool.
Right.
Stay safe, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye bye. Thanks
Bye.
very much. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye bye.